Our next guest speaker is going to talk about the unspeakable multi-cloud. Wait, we don't talk about multi-cloud. Oh, wait, that's Bruno. Sorry, wrong one. Anyway, on how to make multi-cloud a successful journey the first time. Please join me in welcoming Chief Cloud Strategy Officer at Deloitte, David Linthicum. The floor is all yours for the next 15 minutes, and then we'll do some live Q&A.
We're going to talk about the upsides and the downsides of moving to multi-cloud. I'm not a multi-cloud advocate. I'm not even a cloud advocate. I'm here really as an architect to tell you how to take this technology and use it properly. That's where we get down to it, and the ability to kind of use it in an optimized way. So we're going to cover all aspects. We're going to cover what works and what doesn't, and how to succeed the first time. In other words, how you can go through a process and follow a set of pre-described events and make it work the very first time out of the gate. So multi-cloud adoption, we all know, is increasing. Any kind of study you look out there, it's about 95%. Some people say 80%, sometimes less of organizations out there are leveraging multi-cloud. That's typically what I call multi-cloud by accident. So in other words, they may have 90% AWS, and they have 10% miscellaneous clouds that they're leveraging that different departments have brought in there to leverage particular kinds of technologies that may not be available on their primary preferred cloud. And so that's the majority of multi-cloud that's out there. There's not a lot of planning behind it. And it's really kind of haphazard in the way in which they're operating it, the way in which they're trying to take their architecture to the next level. It's kind of unplanned chaos, I think, at the end of the day. But we're going to have to figure out how to get planning around that chaos and how to leverage the clouds effectively so we can get more value out of the public clouds that are part of the portfolio, part of the multi-cloud. And we'll go through what that is. So here's where things are moving, according to me. We kind of went from single cloud deployments, people using a primary cloud provider, AWS being the biggest one out there. Now moving into multi-cloud deployments, some of those are planned, but the majority of them are unplanned. They're just basically, almost like shadow IT was 10 years ago. People are leveraging a credit card to onboard a particular cloud provider that they may not be advocating within IT. So they're kind of going out of going out of spec, but they're using it for a particular reason. Now we're moving into something called cross-cloud services, which you may be hearing in the press out there as supercloud and metacloud, the ability to kind of build this logical architecture that sits above the existing public clouds, which does common services like security operations, governance, FinOps, all these sorts of things. And we're still trying to figure out what that is. We know what the buzzword is. We know what it's going to look like. We know pretty much what's going to be in there, and I'll go over that later in the presentation. But it's an evolving science. And typically it's going to be bespoke to every company that's out there. In other words, it's going to have to be a custom build and a custom stack that's built around the particular requirements. So moving out and looking further in the future, we're going to a cross-cloud platform, the ability to kind of productize everything that's going to be in the supercloud or metacloud, where it's going to be a bit more turnkey, using configuration to configure these things versus kind of cobbling it together, which is what we have to do today, to hopefully the science fiction prediction that we're going to go to ubiquitous deployment, where we're going to have clouds and processes and everything that's going to run everywhere, network connected. They can all find each other. It can all leverage each other. We can build applications on a logical platform. They'll run on any number of physical platforms, which is going to be abstracted from us. And that's kind of where we're looking to go. So the differences are pretty obvious. You have a single cloud deployment. You have a single cloud that does storage, compute, AI development, operations, governance, security, supports various databases. Everybody knows how this stuff works. We've been doing this for 10 to 15 years, depending on your maturity level. Then a multi-cloud deployment, we basically operate, and this is the way most of multi-clouds are operating today. The clouds are kind of decoupled one from another. So they're dealing with cloud A, cloud B, cloud C. AWS, Microsoft, Google would be obviously the ones that we're seeing the most. And they have a couple of things that are making it a bit more complex and difficult to run. They have their own security, their own operations, their own governance, their own observability, their own FinOps systems, things like that, because people are using whatever native tools they're looking to deploy on a particular cloud brand, and they're doing so on each of the cloud brands. So they're using operation tools on AWS, operations tools on Microsoft, operations tools on Google. So that means we're using 3 operations tools, have to keep 3 skill sets around. It's going to be a bit more complex and costly to develop. So here's the problem. And this is actually a multi-cloud stack I did several years ago, trying to figure out what it's going to look like. And I realized that this is complex that we're getting into. And so complexity is what we're battling when we get into these very complex distributed architectures. So it's not the fact that the clouds aren't able to work and play well together, they certainly are. And it's not the fact that we're not able to find the best of breed technologies like databases, things like that, we certainly are. The fact of the matter is we're moving from, say, 1,000 services under management to 10,000 services under management. And so we're getting to a state where if we're using the same operational budget, the operational complexity of just running something like this is going to kill you. So in other words, we can't keep the skill sets around, we can't keep the tool sets around. So if we are going to run to a true multi-cloud, and we're not going to be able to increase all our budgets exponentially, which is typically going to be the case, we have to figure out how to do this and how to manage this and how to architect this in a better way, which I'm going to tell you about that during the remaining of the presentation. So here's the problem. If the number of cloud-based systems rises exponentially, and typically that's what's doing in a multi-cloud environment, and the number of traditional systems is also rising, we're going to hit a tipping point in complexity. And that's typically going to mean that we're going to start receiving negative values from the additive use of cloud-based technologies. So in other words, we're adding technology on to enhance the business, to bring value back to the business, to do something better, to sell something, to build something in a more innovative way. However, if we get to a point where the complexity is too much and we have to spend more money to operate the complexity, to mediate the complexity, to manage the complexity, we're going to start receiving negative value back from any kind of investment in cloud. So in other words, we're investing $1 million in cloud, we may find that it's going to be a negative hit of $500,000 for every million we make. You just can't run a business like that. So it's really trying to figure out how to deal with that complexity problem, how to deal with the cost problem, and how to deal with it in a way that's going to allow things to scale. And by the way, still allow people in the organization who want to leverage best of breed technology to leverage whatever innovative technology they need to solve their problems. We want to enable the developers to have the best tools they can, not limiting to a particular cloud provider. In other words, pick the best database, pick the best AI systems, things like that. So that's the trade-off. Okay, one, we want to do both, and then we want to mitigate and manage complexity. So the key drivers for multi-cloud environments, there's lots of people that talk about reduced cloud spend. That's typically going through competitive negotiations. All this stuff is, mediocre benefits at least. But the big one is going to be technology innovation, the ability to adopt the latest technologies from different leading service providers, and the ability to optimize and leverage those things as best of breed. So the reason we're getting into multi-cloud, and really I view it as one of the main reasons that if you don't have this reason, maybe you should move into a multi-cloud, is because we need to use technology from all kinds of different cloud providers, because there's particular technology that a cloud provider provides that we can't find on other cloud providers, AI system, business analytics system, things like that. And we do see these instances where they need to use a particular database, they need to use a particular analytics tool because it's important to their core solution, but it happens to be not on their primary cloud provider. And so that's in essence how we get to multi-cloud. So if you don't have this need to drive best of breed technology, it's going to be difficult to justify multi-cloud. And I always tell people that if we're looking to create a business case around here, that's what you need to look at. So in other words, what's your innovative multiplier within the organization? Are you really going to be valued on your innovation? And is this able to take your business to the next level? And the question is, maybe not, then we have to look at other alternatives, other architectural simplicity. Challenges of multi-cloud environment. Well, the big one, as we just covered, is going to be management complexity. The ability to leverage abstraction, automation, to mediate complexity, and your ability to deal with complexity on complexity's terms. So in other words, we're not just putting tool on top of tool on top of tool, and we're not trying to put redundant operational layers in place that's just going to make things worse. But our ability to push the services down to some sort of a base primitive level and then put management layers on top of it so we can orchestrate the services, we can leverage security systems, operational systems, FinOps systems, things like that, where we're using one layer to do the majority of it instead of implementing their own little system on each of the cloud providers. And by the way, on the legacy systems and the edge-based systems. And some people have 5 or 6 different clouds, and you're in essence going to be in a technological complex nightmare. And this is something we don't want to do. So the big thing also is cost. I don't know if you've noticed lately, but everybody's complaining about their cloud costs that they're spending, and there's a couple of reasons for that. Number one, I don't think they anticipated the rise in cloud as fast as they thought. And also, they're probably not managing their cloud costs as well as they should. And one of the reasons that that's happening is we're getting into very complex deployments where different cloud technologies are, sitting around and doing different things, and we don't know where we're billing for these things, and it's costing a lot more time. So the cost of a single public cloud deployment is going to go up over time, but multi-cloud is going to have a huge cost multiplier that you need to consider. So multi-cloud, even though people, talk about the negotiation that we just saw in the previous slide, negotiation tactics where you're playing one cloud provider off another, that's not going to give you the big discounts. Ultimately, your ability to manage costs and get them under control using a good FinOps program, tooling, and technology, and your ability to mitigate complexity, and your ability to reduce the number of humans, reduce the number of tools that you need to run the same amount of services that exist across multiple clouds. That's kind of the secret to solving this problem. So the solution is put complexity into a single domain. So operations, security, governance, observability, and there's probably about 20 different other things that go in there as well. Instead of deploying them differently on every one of the cloud providers, using whatever native tools that you think you're going to be successful with in that cloud provider, we're looking for tools that are able to span the clouds. And by the way, this is going to, in many instances, talk down to those native systems. In other words, it's going to communicate and abstract down to the native cloud security layer on Cloud A, on Cloud B, and Cloud C, same observability systems, same AIOps systems that mask these things, governance, FinOps, all these sorts of things. So we're not necessarily displacing the technology. What we're doing is we're putting a management layer on top of it so we can deal with it using common mechanisms, common layers, common automation techniques, and everything is going to be a common orchestration system. So we're putting complexity into a single domain, but the idea is we're going to leverage configuration to change that domain as we need it. So it's going to be easier to change. It's going to take less humans. We're not going to have everybody who needs to be a drop dead skilled in the security systems on all three of the clouds. We're leveraging one system which is able to touch, reach out, and interface with all those systems on our behalf. So this is the whole cross-cloud, super cloud, meta cloud thing you're seeing. I guess there's a buzzword war going on. What's going to win, super cloud or meta cloud? But the idea is pretty much what we just talked about. So we're putting all of these cross-cloud services into a particular logical domain. But by the way, those services have to run someplace. And so they're probably going to run physically on a particular cloud provider. But they run on cloud providers that are able to support a service that's able to reach across providers. And so that's a bit confusing, but that's really a logical layer where the orchestration systems, the observability systems, the service brokerage systems, the security systems are going to physically run on something. That's typically not going to be an on-premise system. It's basically a logical layer, if you think about it, that's going to sit above the existing public cloud providers, abstracting the differences and basically running this for us. And the idea here is we're going to put complexity mitigation, our ability to reduce complexity by building that stack out, by building out the super cloud or meta cloud. So this is the way you build one of those things. And if you're going to move into a multi-cloud and you're going to do the planning, there's a few things that are going to be different from a traditional migration issue. And so a couple of things that are different with multi-cloud versus a single cloud migration deployment. Number one, you see three operations planning. We do that in a single cloud migration, but we're doing that upfront. In other words, we're trying to figure out what the complexity issues are going to bring because we're looking at the operational planning that occurs ahead of time. So therefore, we go into it with our eyes wide open in terms of how much complexity we're going to have to mediate. The other thing is basically defining common services. We talked about common cloud services being the super cloud or meta cloud. This is where you do that. Common data protection, scanning, compliance, SecOps, governance services, cognitive services, all these sorts of things. Anything that we can pull out of the native cloud providers and put at another logical layer where we're leveraging a single set of services that's going to span the clouds, that's going to mediate complexity. That's going to provide a benefit, architectural benefit right to the bottom line. And then also the ability to go through a cloud complexity management step where we're looking at abstraction, automation, complexity mitigation, and actually assessing and auditing how we're dealing and managing complexity. So that's it. I want to thank you. Don't forget my cloud podcast on cloud, and also follow me on InfoWorld, my cloud blog.
All right, David, thank you so much for that session. I got a bunch of questions, so I'm glad we have so much time to actually pull these in. I really appreciate it. Cloud, multi-cloud, super cloud, meta cloud. It's just another term for that. And somebody else's cloud maybe. But speaking of that, Isn't it really like, I mean, think about the cost associated with going multi-cloud and using different services. Is it going to cost us more, or are you going to be more efficient or redundant in it?
Yeah, it's definitely going to cost you more. I mean, we can talk about everything we just talked about was mediating those costs. In other words, instead of being 3 times as much, we're trying to get down to 1.5 times as much to onboard 3 or 4 different clouds. So the costs are always going to go up. That's why I said there has to be a business benefit, the business benefit of leveraging best of breed technology. So you have to look at what the company does for a living, how they get valued in the marketplace. Their innovation is going to be a force multiplier for them in the business. And if some company is able to do that, like a technology company or a banking company, then definitely it's warranted because they need to leverage whatever technology that's able to provide them with the ability to create innovative solutions. But if you're a small manufacturing company in the Midwest, it may not be as much value to you. And the cost of going into multi-cloud may be way more than any business benefit would return back to the business.
All right, so you talked about enterprise and small businesses. Let's touch on that because small businesses really can't afford having multiple clouds and solutions, but not every cloud provider provides all the same services. Some are worth more than others. How do you really tackle those challenges?
Yeah, the small businesses are going to be tough because in many instances they're moving into multi-cloud by accident for the reasons you just mentioned. And so in other words, they didn't understand, they wanted a particular database on another cloud provider than the one they currently have an agreement with. And my advice to with them to be look at the trade-offs. In other words, removing that particular database that's add additional complexity, you have to keep those skills around to run that particular database. Is the cost of doing that going to come back in terms of value directly into the business? And if the answer is no, it's probably something you shouldn't explore right now. I think we have a tendency to love technology and want to move off anywhere technology is taking us, but we have to ask the business benefits of doing that as we move in those directions. In many instances, for a small business, which are typically cash poor, it's going to be the cost. The cost isn't really going to be there to justify the business any business benefit coming back. But they may be a small research organization where they do need these innovations, and they can justify the ability to move into multi-cloud and deal with the complexity and deal with the additional services because the value is going to come back.
Okay, David, I got another question because it kind of goes off of now I'm a small business where it's very hard. Everybody wears many hats. Now I'm an enterprise and I have a number of people behind me, but how do you tackle the skills for all these other services and multiple cloud providers?
Yeah, and that's the biggest problem today. I mean, you're not only dealing with the complexity of it, but if you're dealing with complexity of having over heterogeneity, in other words, lots of different systems around, you have to keep skill sets around to maintain each one of those. And while it may be easy to find skills to deal with, say, as an example, the AWS stack, you may have problems finding skills to deal with a Microsoft stack or vice versa. And so you're going to find that it's going to limit your ability to use all these things equally. And so in other words, you're going to find that certain aspects of your business, if you move into multi-cloud, you just can't find the skills to do it. And so people aren't going to get the support and services. You're going to get outages, frustrations, things like that. So you have to consider that. In many instances, it's not that we're unable to get the skills in time. We're probably not going to get the skills in the time that's needed to build these projects out. So you have to map that back into the project plans, and see if you can reduce the scope of the project just basically because of the skills that you can't obtain.
Yeah, I see the skills, and this is my professional opinion, is that the skills for one cloud provider versus the other one, you're not going to be specific on those set of skills. You're going to be more of a generalist because there are so many services out there. It's really how to grasp some of those. My next question for you, David, is have you seen some success or failures in trying these types of methods of doing multi-cloud?
Yeah, the great thing about working at Deloitte is I get to see lots of projects and look at success. And one of the core patterns of success is not necessarily spending more money. It's basically investing in innovation ahead of time and doing the planning. So people who are going to work a multi-cloud to failure, and I do a lot of postmortems on these sorts of things, just didn't do the planning. They didn't know what they were getting into. They didn't know the operational complexity moving forward, and they ended up not having the resources to maintain the thing. And so the project was dumped, and they went back to using a single cloud deployment or something like that. Those that did the planning find that they actually spend about the same amount of money, sometimes less, but are successful because they're able to put some very innovative technologies on the map and planning systems on the map. So they're mediating complexity before they're actually buying the technology. And just by doing that, that gives you a huge advantage.
All right, David, I actually just got a question here from the audience. Are there cases on enterprise journey to multi-cloud environments? Have you seen any case studies around it?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at it on Deloitte.com, you'll see a bunch of case studies that we've done. Read my blog on Infoworld.com. I outline the one I see. Everybody who will externalize a case study for public, I'm going to make hay of it and take advantage of it for my own fame and fortune. It's keep an eye on those sorts of things. But most everybody is using multi-cloud out there. That's the easy thing to do. 95%, most people are doing. They're just not doing it in unified ways. And so you're going to find a case study where they just have it and they're just doing some augmented and some tactical planning around it. As far as people who are using it strategically, those are going to be few and far between. But as they show up, read my blog, I'll tell you about them. Listen to my podcast, I'll tell you about them.
Nice, David. Real quick, last question from the audience. Are you a fan of CIS and not the show?
No.
We're going to end it right there.